I'm a school board trustee in Canadian Rockies Public Schools in Alberta, and our Inspiring Hearts and Minds strategy was our work to create a vision for education in the future. We came up with a year-long process that involved teachers, students, parents, administrators, and community members. And we came upon two really important concepts: whole child education, looking at social, emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual development of children, and a whole community approach that everyone in the community should be involved in improving the education system, and that schools should be open to and have wide involvement from many, many people in the community. So our vision that we created has now started to move into action. Our teachers are working on a shared vision of instructional excellence. We've created different leadership approaches. We've always had an educational leadership team, but now we've added a distributed leadership team. And that means that everybody in the system, teachers, teacher aides, principals, vice principals, everybody can play a role in leading learning in our schools. And we also have something called generative governance. Our community education network is made up of teachers, students, parents, administrators, community members, and they guide us in our work to look at the big questions that are before us. We looked at a 3-year school calendar and we asked the big question, what calendar best supports learning? And instead of administrators just building that calendar, the whole community built the calendar, and so the whole community can support the calendar. And we did that to hire a new superintendent, creating an ideal candidate profile. And we will continue to use new topics to look at what is a community approach to education.
In KwaZulu-Natal, we are using two strategies as part of the ILE project. The first is a strategy that addresses barriers to learning, particularly those experienced by vulnerable children. Barriers related to issues around poverty, health. In KwaZulu-Natal, HIV and AIDS is a huge issue for children, being orphaned or children affected themselves. That strategy has been going probably for about 4 years now and has become integrated into the education system. But what we've recognized is that technology as a strategy to transform education, or as a tool to assist with education transformation, is something that we are grappling with. And so for that reason, we've combined the two strategies, the one that is about addressing barriers to learning, and the other bringing in technology as a catalyst for achieving personalized learning in the classroom, where every child can learn at their own rate, within their abilities, within their interests. So essentially that is what we are exploring as part of the OECD ILE project. In relation to the second question around leadership for learning, what has been really interesting for us is, and it was probably the workshop we had in Paris in July this year, where we recognized that government is the key leader currently in South Africa as far as providing education is concerned. But what we've recognized is that we're not going to achieve transformation if we see government as leading and the rest of the players following. And in fact, for us, that's probably the most exciting part of our participation in the ILE, is exploring this leading or leadership partnerships where we see government playing in an enabling environment role, where they provide an enabling environment for all partners to play a leadership role, whether we're talking community leaders, we're talking NGOs, we're talking corporates, private business. And I think we have a very good philosophy in South Africa. It's an African philosophy. It's called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu means your child is my child. So in other words, we are in this collectively and we make decisions collectively. And so the leadership partnership issue is a very exciting one that we are pursuing very strongly as part of the ILE.
The goal of the middle school reform is a first important big step towards reducing selection mechanisms in the Austrian system at early years. And it is focused on the lower secondary level, and I would say we're about halfway there to reducing those selection mechanisms. As a part of the pilot before the reform was mandated, we initiated a new role on each school for one teacher. And it is a teacher leadership role. And we called these teachers learning designers. And the learning designers have a special professionalization program so that they can focus on their schools on curriculum and instructional development as teacher leaders. The learning designers are not the only teacher leaders that entered the system as a part of the new school reform. We have teacher leaders who are focused on e-learning and digital competence, which is a key aspect of the new curriculum. We also have teacher leaders in the area of gender equality and culture and arts. And old roles and functions are changing as well to also become more of a teacher leadership role. In addition, we have several teachers at each school who are in a school development function on the school level. All of that is part of shared leadership, which is a key strategy for Leadership for Learning in this school development project and the school reform.
The first condition is to hold a prestige social position that allows you to see the big picture. The second condition is to develop a common vision about the social or the educational system. The third condition is the ability to develop and create a structure. And the fourth condition is about evaluation and feedback at the people that doing the innovation. And in Israel, in the Ministry of Education, we have a special division that take care of the experimental school and encourage school to develop innovative learning environment by support them and give them the right resources and help them to develop a vision and eventually help them to disseminate the innovative all around the educational system.
The stages of the very successful reform process were not lockstep, and they evolved, but it started with a common understanding of the problems to be addressed. And that's a very long process of dialogue and agreement, actually understanding what data counts, looking to experts, developing a coherent view of each other's issues. And then from that understanding of the common problem, or a common understanding of the problem, they move to a common language so that you not only have the definition of what you're going to be tackling and agreeing on that, but you've got common language through which you can talk about progress and talk about strategies. Then they went into a series of commitments, if you like, about what underlying behaviours and ideas and practices were going to take them forward in improvement. And that concerned, I think the key ones it was about classroom practice, and it was about very carefully and precisely using evidence to talk about effective practice. Their focus was initially on literacy and numeracy, but that's now expanded. So classroom practice sat there as a very central and important objective in the improvement strategy. Secondly, the role of the principal, the role of leadership in leading instruction, in being an expert in pedagogy. So once again, that was about the classroom. that was about students' experiences and teachers' behaviours. Then there was a commitment to sharing, not only sharing among the teaching staff, but sharing between schools, sharing in the network, not in a competitive way as such, but in a way that enabled everybody to be improving and to be spinning off other people's success. But then I think one of the magic ingredients of this particular strategy of reform at scale was a long-term focus on implementation. So armed, if you like, with precise practices, with new roles for leadership, with commitments to sharing data, then you go the long yards, you stick at it, and it's relentless implementation. And it's implementation of quite precise practices, and then review of progress, and then deciding what the next step is, and keeping that moving for a number of years. Now, where these networks might have started in what might seem to be quite a mandated set of requirements, over time, the boundaries naturally become more permeable in terms of how networks relate. You start to have sort of flourishing innovation that's relevant to a particular group at a particular time. So diversity starts to become apparent, and then people learn from each other. And I guess that's the environment they're operating in now, of a sort of flourishing innovation, dependence on collaborative practices among networks, and still very, very relentlessly focusing on implementation and on classroom practice.
Learning is now so important because we live in knowledge societies and knowledge economies. And if there's knowledge, there has to be learning. But innovation is important because the old models of schooling are not working well enough, and because we're expecting more and more from learning, particularly deep learning, 21st century learning, lifelong learning. Now, when you need to innovate, that means you need to change schools, change learning environments. That means design and redesign. And that doesn't happen by itself. It needs leadership. It means active agency to make that happen. So we at the OECD have been particularly interested in leadership that's strongly focused on learning, redesigning learning environments to really make them powerful for the 21st century. And we've done it through two ways. One, through looking at a whole set of case studies and identifying a framework which puts learning leadership right in there as one of the 3 or 4 key features. And we've gone beyond that and said it's so important that we've done a special study of learning leadership with new authors and a conference that's taking place here in Barcelona. It's taking place tomorrow and the day after on the 4th and 5th of December 2013. And so at OECD, a new book and a new conference with a whole set of international participants from around the world.
Well, if we're thinking about learning environments, then the leadership of those environments is absolutely vital. We're talking about the leadership of the learning business. And the learning business is the most important business of all. Now that means if you're going to be a leader in this game, you need to be a leader of your own organisation. You need to be a leader of the profession that you are working with. You need to be a leader of the local community that you are connected with. That's leadership at one level, but you also need to be a system leader. You need to be a leader that knows that this is about operating within quite complex environments, and you need to think about the political environment that you're working with. You need to think not just about the young people in your own care, you need to think about all of the young people that are within your particular country or your jurisdiction. So you need to think carefully about the way in which you're going to do not only improvement, but how you're going to lead innovation and change. And that's a collective endeavour. That means you need to be networked in order to work more effectively, not only within your own institution, but across the whole of the system. And then when you think about it, learning is not just a local business or a national business or a country business, it's a global business. So as a leader, you need to think about how you can ensure that you can access and use the technology to connect with others. You need to think seriously about the importance of cultural connections, because this is going to be something where young people are going to be graduating into not just their own society, their own economy, they're going to be global citizens. So you need to lead in that way, and you need to be able to lead for sustainability. This is not just a short-term agenda. This is actually an agenda where we want leadership that will help to promote the best possible outcomes for all young people in all settings and across the entire globe, because we are now so interconnected and interdependent. So it's a fantastic game to be in. Education and leadership, local, national, global.
Inquiry in British Columbia is at the heart of everything that we do. And if you think of people who are really, really deeply curious, they're always engaged. So we think that using a spiral of inquiry approach that has phases that everybody learns to do, young people and adults, provides a structure for curiosity that takes us in truly innovative directions. We can't imagine doing innovative learning environments, building them, without a powerful perspective on inquiry that kind of acts as a framework. And that curiosity, we think, drives lifelong learning and change and everything that we want for young people today.
One of our big goals in British Columbia is that every learner will leave our setting, our classrooms, our schools, more curious than when they arrive. We see young children arriving in school or preschool bubbling with questions, and sometimes by adolescence those questions have changed to, is it on the test, what it's worth, what's it worth, what are we doing today? And those are soul-destroying questions. We think for children to maintain a curiosity and a passion for learning, they need to be surrounded by adults who are curious as well. So our challenge as leaders is how do we create the conditions in our schools for teachers to maintain their curiosity and to bring their passion of learning alive for the learners of all ages. So our approach in British Columbia is an active spiral of inquiry which creates the space for teachers to be curious and opens up the space for their learners as well.
L'informe sobre les experiències de lideratge per l'aprenentatge a Catalunya destaca en format d'informes breus les 6 experiències que hem analitzat amb una metodologia que no és judicadora, que no és avaluadora, no pretén avaluar què és allò que s'està fent, sinó que el que pretén justament també és aprendre d'aquestes experiències. Què hem trobat? Doncs hem trobat, naturalment, situacions diferents respecte als diferents elements analitzats. No tots els centres presenten les mateixes característiques, com és normal, però sí que hem pogut identificar efectes d'aquest lideratge. Hem pogut identificar, per exemple, millores en la cohesió i en les dinàmiques interpersonals en els centres. Centres que tenien dificultats relacionals, de convivència, d'interacció. Aquests centres han millorat moltíssim en aquestes condicions. S'han observat millores també en el nivell de graduació dels estudiants. Centres amb taxes més baixes de graduació incrementen la taxa de graduació del seu alumnat. Es millora en la retenció d'alumnes en el sistema, és a dir, alumnes que abans es perdien i deixaven d'estudiar i, per tant, generaven abandonament prematur, no només al postobligatori, sinó en el marc també de l'ensenyament obligatori, aquestes taxes disminueixen les d'abandonament, augmenten les de retenció en el sistema. Tots aquests efectes s'han pogut constatar i estan relacionats amb l'existència de projectes clarament vinculats amb el lideratge en aquestes condicions en tots aquests centres.
So the repeating is very high in Wallonia-Brussels Federation since 30 years. That is beginning already at the end of kindergarten and primary school, and of course it's very costful for individuals but also for the system because we spend a lot of money to make each child going through the courses. And several ministers and administration tried to break that situation, to diminish, to reduce repeating and maintaining in our system. But in fact, we involve in innovative learning environment because we saw that the very most important question is to try to lead the system in another way, in an innovative way, because degrees exist. the financial investment is high, and we don't see change in practicals, in pedagogical practices. And so by the innovative learning environment, we are trying a new way of governance, a collaborative governance, where all stakeholders are part of the action, are making the diagnosis and planning how to work together to help all teachers, stakeholders, to change their practices to reduce repeating.
El projecte Entorns Innovadors d'Aprenentatge i en concret el projecte sobre lideratge per l'aprenentatge que hem fet en col·laboració amb l'equip de la OCDE ha estat una ocasió única per Catalunya de promoure una nova concepció del lideratge educatiu, el lideratge pedagògic, posant el focus en l'aprenentatge i en el centre la figura de l'aprenent. Tot això ens ha estat un revulsiu i ens ha empès a repensar el disseny del nostre model d'aprenentatge. Pensem que és necessari en el sistema educatiu català promoure el desig de l'aprenent, l'adhesió dels estudiants i de l'alumnat a aprendre i que això ha estat una oportunitat única. De fet, hem treballat en col·laboració i hem empès una recerca. En la recerca hem fet observació a les aules, per tant tenim una metodologia d'observació a les aules que ha estat molt valorada pels 6 centres que han participat. Pensem que hem promogut, de fet, des de la Fundació Jaume Bofill, un procés únic de lideratge per l'aprenentatge a Catalunya, amb una experiència única que està publicada i amb la celebració del Congrés de Lideratge per l'Aprenentatge i de tot el material que ens sortirà. Pensem que estem donant una oportunitat a Catalunya de recuperar la tradició que tenim com a país, de ser innovadors en l'educació i de fer renovació pedagògica.
La nostra recerca ha identificat un lideratge per l'aprenentatge, és a dir, un lideratge que genera aprenentatge, que fa que totes les persones que intervenen en el procés, que intervenen en el marc d'un centre, gràcies a diferents estils, a l'estil de lideratge que hi ha, doncs facilita que la majoria dels components s'identifiquin amb un projecte que és disruptiu respecte de l'anterior, de la situació anterior, i que, per tant, genera il·lusió, apassionament per tenir un nou projecte de centre. Aquest nou projecte ajuda a millorar l'aprenentatge i els resultats de l'aprenentatge de totes les persones que intervenen en el marc de l'escola o de l'institut i que, per tant, els empodera i facilita que continuïn aprenent. A nosaltres ens ha semblat que això era molt interessant perquè alguns d'aquests factors en la literatura internacional podrien estar poc identificats i, en canvi, en la mostra que hem trobat, que hem analitzat, estan clarament identificats.
Well, the 4 strategies outlined focus on the people who are actively involved in the teaching and learning process. In this case, the school or the school system. The 4 of them are really powerful. I would say that the first one that has to do with professional learning communities that focus on principles is important because it focuses on networks of principals working together towards improving their own schools. The second one that has to do with teacher leadership. Are teachers who are understanding data, understanding learning, and again, through their own interactions, are developing their own capacities for teaching and learning. The other strategy that we're talking about here is about coaching. Coaching, distinct from mentoring, is one by which we provide the principals with the tools and the constructive feedback that enables them to achieve set goals. And finally, the strategy that to me is probably the most important one is to really pay attention to the students, help them listen to them, and allow them to be part of this transformation of the school environment through formal or informal activities that help develop their own leadership, which is actually the learning. So to me, the 4 combined are very powerful strategies. We have been using them in New York since 2002, and we are now at the point that it's good to reflect upon these past 10 years and see how far we have come in the process of improving the schools.
We have to understand leadership as practice because the practice of leading is where the rubber of school leadership meets the road of instructional or improving teaching. You can change structures, you can change roles, you can change positions, you can create new organizational charts, but all these things might change and the day-to-day practice of leading can still remain the same. Therefore, we have to really get to the heart of the matter. We have to really focus in on what happens from one day to the next when it comes to leading teaching and learning in a school system. The implications for schools are that we need to create situations where school leaders can actually reflect on, study their own practice. Not just study the organizational chart, not just study the definitions of particular roles and responsibilities in the school, but actually reflect on what happens in a faculty meeting, in a grade level meeting, in a department meeting. And to do that, for example, we might videotape ourselves practicing, facilitating a faculty meeting or a school assembly, and then sit down and critically analyze the practice that's going on. Is it really supporting the development of innovative ideas? Is it creating situations that promote innovation, the emergence of new ideas, or perhaps it's just stifling that?
Innova Schools is trying to overcome the problem of quality of education in Peru. In Peru, we have done a good job trying to solve the problem of access to education, but we have a huge challenge in terms of providing children in Peru with an education of quality. And why is this so important? It's very important because our children are not performing as they should according to the national assessment as well as the international assessment. So it is a must that we look into very innovative ways in order to find solutions to the problem of quality of education for our children.
Well, I think if we first look at innovative learning environments, we need to take into account that we are not talking about just about schools. We are talking about different spaces, different environments that can come together and help to improve the quality of education. Therefore, if we think in what sort of partners we can have, the third sector, so charities, parents association, are really valid actors because they bring a lot of experience from people, from communities, from real life into schools and to the learning experience. So I think nowadays, if we look at the IOE project, the Innovative Learning Project, we can see right now that there are a lot of charities, a lot of foundations, and other organizations that are really contributing. And I also think that they are impacting in the same core, in the pedagogical core of learning. And for this reason, we can see a much more open learning experience, a much more open learning environment.
Evaluation is, of course, always a professional responsibility for anyone involved in education, evaluation of their own practice. If you look at innovative learning environments, you often note that they do not just use evaluation to gather evidence to fulfill accountability needs, but that they also use more formative evaluation methods. And with that we mean evaluation that's part of an ongoing development. So collecting information about what's going on in the school to evaluate it and to improve it. And it's an important part of professional development also, to establish routines of evaluating together what's going on and what teachers, for example, can do better together. What is also important is to involve learners and parents in the evaluation. So innovative learning environments really make sure that the learners and parents are actively involved, share responsibility, that they can comment on practice and together find ways to make it even better.
I think learning leadership at its heart is powerful and profound social leadership that involves complex chemistry at many different levels of the system. It's an ecosystem of relationships. It is focused on enhancing 21st century learning and doing everything that is necessary to design, to develop, to sustain that. It brings in new partners, and we have to ask the questions as we try and put this into practice of who needs to be involved, how do we do this, what is it really about, where does it take place in all the spaces, when does it happen, everywhere and all of the time, and fundamentally, why are we doing this? To make a difference now and in the future for all of our children and young people.
Transformation is so important because we have to be clear that just improving marginally or incrementally our current schooling system is insufficient to the task. It will come nowhere near creating the kind of learners that we need or creating the kind of solutions that we need to solve our problems. So we talk about transformation because those two terms, transform, means that the whole system has to change its shape and to become much more capable of creating the kinds of circumstances and conditions for young people genuinely to flourish and be everything that they can. So I want to distinguish between transformation and improvement. Not that improvement is important, we've got to carry on improving the schools that we've got, but at the same time, like any successful company, we need an R&D capacity that's looking to the future and creating different models. No company on this earth would succeed and continue to be sustained if it didn't have some kind of R&D capacity which was looking to different models, different processes, fitting them to changing needs and changing circumstances. We've never had that in education and we need it now. And we need it not for improvement but for transformation. Leadership is a fundamental part of that. Unless leaders create the conditions in which that kind of experimentalism can be endorsed and learned from, then it becomes very, very difficult. And what I think we will see is very little innovation from within the system, and the shifts that are bound to come, incidentally, will come from outside the education system. And we're already seeing that in all kinds of new apps, mobile approaches, new companies, the interventions of big foundations, social entrepreneurs. All of these people are making kinds of changes and bringing up new opportunities and possibilities, which I believe that the conventional school system is ignoring at its peril. So the leadership which understands that shift will be the kind of leadership that creates a vibrant new system, I believe.
The importance of backward mapping is essential now that we're entertaining school design as a means of transforming schools. Because what backward mapping does is it identifies the key elements of a school that need transformation. Moreover, the connectivity between those elements, and then thirdly gives us a methodology by which leaders and others can manage, lead and bring change about. So it's both a conceptualization of the process of school design, and it enables the actual implementation of design model. So it's a methodology, which is what's really needed. And the question about the importance of leadership and learning, I think, if I'm honest, if I look back over the past, leadership and learning have been disconnected. Traditionally in schools, leaders have led and teachers and students have taught and learned. So the emphasis now on bringing leadership and learning together and seeing them as integral is really, really important. It's a new conception and a new enactment of leadership. Leadership is important for learning, of course, because it's not the only thing that's important to learning, but it's important because it's necessary for setting the goals of learning, for resourcing learning, for motivating and engaging the human resource, people, students, teachers, to engage in learning. And moreover, it's absolutely vital for sustaining learning and scaling up learning and new innovations of learning across whole schools and systems.
principles for leadership for learning. We came up with 5 principles, but they didn't just happen immediately. It was over a long period of time in a number of countries working together to try and understand those quite contested concepts. What does leadership mean in different countries, and how does it translate? So in our Austrian colleagues, the word der Führer wasn't the word that was going to be used, or Führung, a word for leadership. And words for learning, you know, you'd think that was quite simple, but there are different kind of conceptions around the whole nature of learning. And then the connection for leadership for learning. What does that mean in a practical context of a school? How do you create a learning environment and a leadership environment? So the principles we came up with 5, first of all, a focus on learning, that there has to be throughout the whole school and beyond the school into the parent and local community, that we constantly talk about learning. That is our focus, that's what we do. And secondly, the second condition, conditions for learning was the second principle, that you have to create conditions in which people are able to talk about the nature of learning, the process of learning, how learning travels or sometimes fails to travel between one classroom and another. The third principle was dialogue, and our Greek colleagues talked about dialogos, meaning flowing through it, and opposed, for example, to the Latin concept of discutere, which means to tear to pieces. So dialogos is how do we connect with, listen to different understandings of people, how they come to the whole notion of learning and the notion of leadership. And the fourth principle then, shared leadership, that leadership just isn't exercised at the apex of the organizational pyramid by the big heroic leader, but we all have a leadership potential and a leadership capacity. Even the 4 or 5-year-old, like my own granddaughter, who can tell me, "Grandpa, I'll tell you what to do here," or she'll take my hand and show me things. She has a strong leadership capacity. So how do we continue and build on that? And the 5th principle is shared accountability, not just accountability up the hierarchy, but an accountability that we owe to one another collegially, and that I owe to young people, and that young people owe to one another. And I think those 5 principles have traveled internationally. Now in Ghana, they've been adopted by the ministry in Ghana, in Africa, because they have been translated into that own context, that particular culture, and they make sense and they resonate. So these are pretty robust and enduring principles.
The idea is to come to change the way the teachers teach. And it is not so easy because you have to gain the trust of the teacher first. And so you have to approach the school first with general projects, and work with all the people there, students, professors, and so on. And then gradually to start to work with groups, like groups of teachers, or maybe also a group of pupils, but mainly group of teachers, And so then you start to know the teacher, and it's possible to start with a project, with a very, like we did with understanding by design, to start with a methodology and to work with individual teachers. So at this point, the teacher, you start from teacher needs, first from school needs, then from teacher needs, you give an answer, based on some very robust and scientific kind of operate based on education, research, and so on. And then you are able to perform this thing. I will say that in this way it's possible to take educational research from outside, from the field of university and where it was experimented, to schools and to apply inside schools together with teachers.
An innovative learning environment is an active learning environment where teachers are using a broad repertoire of teaching methods and provide formative feedback. An innovative learning environment is full of emotions that catalyze deep learning